The 1987 Alabama cold case that haunted Birmingham for nearly 4 decades has finally been solved, and the arrest has left the city reeling. February 21, 2025, 7:12. On a narrow stretch of 21st Street South, just east of UAB Hospital, a convoy of unmarked sedans rolled up to a weathered brick duplex. The Birmingham Police Department's cold case unit, working with the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences, was about to end one of the state's longest unsolved murders. Inside, a retired long-haul truck driver named Dale Merritt was stirring sugar into his coffee when he saw the blue lights flashing outside his window. He stepped onto his porch in a faded flannel shirt, squinting against the cold morning haze. Officers moved fast. Within seconds, his mug hit the pavement, coffee spilling across the concrete, and Merritt was in handcuffs. The arrest was calm, methodical, almost silent. Neighbors on their way to work stopped in disbelief as detectives led him to a waiting car. To them, Merritt was the definition of ordinary quiet, punctual, always waving from his porch. No one had ever connected him to the name Carolyn Reeves, a 26-year-old waitress who disappeared from Birmingham's Lakeview district in the spring of 1987. That name had lingered for years, whispered in true crime forums, invoked in prayer circles, stamped on faded flyers once taped to diner windows. And now, after 38 years, police say they finally know who killed her. The key was a cigarette butt. It had been sealed inside an evidence box since 1987, tagged and logged, forgotten on a shelf deep in the state crime lab. When the cold case unit reopened the Reeves file in late 2023, investigators ordered a re-examination of every physical item. That's when a lab technician at the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences, working under contract with a private genetic genealogy company in Virginia, found the overlooked Marlboro filter that had been collected beside Carolyn's body. Back then, DNA science was in its infancy. In 1987, analysts could type blood and test for broad enzyme markers, but full genetic profiles were rare and expensive. So the cigarette was stored, not destroyed, just in case. Now, decades later, science had caught up with time. Using low copy number SNP profiling, technicians extracted a partial DNA sequence from the saliva on the filter. That profile was uploaded to a public genealogical database, one of the same open-source platforms used by millions of Americans to trace their ancestry. Within days, an algorithm produced several hits, distant relatives of an unidentified male, all tracing back to one family tree rooted in North Alabama. That's where forensic genealogist Dr. Rebecca Fontaine came in. Working 12-hour days, she mapped out that tree, cross-referencing birth records, census data, and obituaries. Her diagram narrowed the pool to 3 living men. One of them, a 63-year-old retired truck driver named Dale Merritt, had lived in Birmingham at the time of the murder and once hauled routes that passed near Carolyn's diner. Detectives moved quickly. On February 10th, they secured a court-approved buccal swab from Merritt. The test was processed at the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences in Montgomery. 2 weeks later, the report came back. A probabilistic genotyping match to the DNA recovered from the cigarette, with a confidence level exceeding 99.98%. The probability of that profile belonging to anyone other than Merritt, the lab wrote, was less than 1 in 2 billion. Still, investigators knew the question that always comes next. Could the cigarette have been left innocently? Could Merritt have smoked it there days or weeks before Carolyn Reeves's death? Detective Marla Vance, who took over the case in 2019, anticipated the argument. The cigarette was recovered less than 2 feet from the victim's body, she said. That area was sealed immediately and never reopened to the public. There is no scenario where that DNA transfer could have been benign. The evidence, sealed under chain of custody for almost 4 decades, had never left the lab until that test. It was, by every procedural measure, uncontaminated. When the DNA confirmation came through, the team briefed the Jefferson County District Attorney's Office. Within 24 hours, an arrest warrant was issued for first-degree murder under Alabama Code Section 13A62. And so, on that gray morning in February, officers surrounded Merritt's duplex on 21st Street South. Inside the precinct, after his rights were read, Merritt barely spoke. He asked for his inhaler, then a lawyer. Detectives noted his calm, the absence of surprise. When investigators told him the cigarette had spoken for him, he blinked slowly, as if hearing an old rumor confirmed. Outside, the news spread like wildfire. By mid-morning, Birmingham news reporters had set up outside police headquarters. Retired truck driver arrested in 1987 waitress murder, the chyron read. Locals gathered along 6th Avenue South, phones raised, filming the convoy as it pulled away. The district attorney, James Holloway, gave a short statement on the courthouse steps. "This arrest represents 38 years of persistence and progress," Holloway said. "Forensic genealogy pointed us to a family. Science proved the individual. Justice at last has a name." For Carolyn Reeves's family, the call came just after 9. Her younger brother, now 61, had spent most of his adult life quietly campaigning for answers. When the detective's voice came through his phone, he didn't ask for details. He just whispered one word. Finally. By noon, national networks had picked up the story. CNN ran a split-screen broadcast showing Merritt's 2025 mugshot beside the original 1987 police sketch, eerily similar in jawline and eyes. Online, Birmingham residents filled comment threads with disbelief. Some remembered him as the soft-spoken neighbor who fixed old cars. Others swore they'd seen him at the same diner where Carolyn worked. Detective Vance faced cameras again at a press briefing that afternoon. "Science caught up with time," she said, echoing the line that would headline every broadcast that night. And time finally ran out for Mr. Merritt. The press conference lasted just 7 minutes. No motive was released. Investigators said the case was still active and that Merritt had not yet entered a plea. The court scheduled his first appearance for the following Monday in Jefferson County Circuit Court. Across Birmingham, the mood was one of disbelief. The idea that Merritt, a man who'd attended block parties, paid his taxes, and volunteered at a local trucking charity, had been living quietly among them for nearly 4 decades, unsettled everyone. Neighbors recalled that he rarely traveled far after retirement, spending most mornings at a corner cafe near 5 Points South, reading the paper, tipping in cash. A waitress there remembered he always sat facing the window, watching traffic. To many, it was the ordinariness that was hardest to process. That afternoon, Lieutenant Carl Johnson, head of the cold case unit, told reporters the case should remind the public that nothing truly goes cold anymore. "The evidence is there," he said. "It's just waiting for the technology to find its voice." When the mugshot hit social media that evening, it traveled fast, shared by local crime pages, Reddit forums, and genealogy groups that follow solved cold cases. Comment sections filled with applause for detectives, sympathy for the Reeves family, and one haunting thread of speculation: what finally made him slip? The official answer: nothing. Merritt had lived cautiously, left no record, committed no further known crimes. He had blended in so well that even routine traffic stops never flagged his name. The DNA was the only witness that had waited quietly, perfectly preserved until technology could speak for it. Inside the evidence locker at the Birmingham Police Department, the original Reeves file spanned 3 thick binders. The first contained typewritten witness statements from 1987. The second held photographs of the Lakeview crime scene. The third, the one reopened in 2023, was now topped with a single fresh sheet. Defendant identified: Dale Merritt, DOB, the 11th of April 1961. Match confirmed via SNP genealogy and buccal swab. Warrant executed the 21st of February 2025. 38 years of silence ended with one line. That evening, rain swept across downtown. The streetlights along 21st South reflected off the wet asphalt where the arrest had unfolded that morning. A few reporters lingered, broadcasting live shots beside yellow tape still fluttering at the edge of Merritt's porch. The duplex windows were dark now, sealed as a secondary scene. Across town, in a quiet cul-de-sac on the north side, the Reeves family gathered in their living room. Carolyn's photo, the one used in every newspaper story, her smile bright and steady, sat framed on the mantel. Her brother spoke softly to the local station that came to interview him. "We waited 38 years for that knock on the door," he said. "I just wish Mom had lived to see it." For the Birmingham Police Department, the arrest was both triumph and burden. Triumph, because technology had delivered long-awaited justice. Burden, because it reopened old wounds, reminders of a city that once lived in fear when a young woman's life was taken without reason. Before leaving her office that night, Detective Vance placed the new case folder beside her desk lamp. In bold marker, she wrote 3 words on the cover: Carolyn Reeves, closed. Then she paused, pen still in hand. The science had answered the who. But the why, the reason Merritt chose her, the link between their paths remained invisible, trapped somewhere between memory and silence. Outside, thunder rolled over the city. If you like cases where one overlooked clue flips a whole town, you're in the right place. But to understand this moment, we need to go back to where it began. To understand the arrest on 21st Street, we need to remember who Carolyn Reeves was and what Birmingham looked like when she vanished. Spring 1987. The Lakeview district was changing. Old warehouses were being converted into cafes. Neon signs flickered above brick front bars, where factory workers once clocked in. The air smelled of diesel, honeysuckle, and fried catfish from Benny's Diner, where Carolyn worked the morning shift. She was 26. Auburn hair pulled into a loose braid, a blue apron tied at the waist, name tag pinned slightly crooked. Every regular at Benny's knew her laugh. It came from the chest, unguarded, easy. She was the kind of waitress who remembered who liked extra lemon in their tea and which truckers tipped with silver dollars. Born and raised in Tarrant, just north of the city, Carolyn had moved to Birmingham after high school. She shared a small duplex on Claremont Avenue with her 2-year-old daughter, Emily, and her older sister, Lydia, who helped with childcare while Carolyn worked double shifts. Her life was ordinary in the best way. Church on Sundays at street marks, movie nights with her sister, and paychecks stretched just far enough to cover rent and a few pastel dresses from Parisian's department store downtown. Detective notes later described her as predictable, punctual, friendly. That predictability was exactly why her disappearance cut so deep. On April 4th, 1987, she worked a Saturday breakfast rush that spilled past noon. At 2:30 p.m., her manager clocked her out. She told him she was heading home to change, maybe run errands before dinner with her boyfriend, a city bus driver named Ronnie Greer. No one ever saw her alive again. By 6 p.m., Ronnie was calling the diner, asking if she'd stayed late. By 8 p.m., Lydia called police. At 9:17 p.m., an officer found Carolyn's blue Toyota Corolla parked half a mile from her apartment, engine cold, driver's door unlocked. Her purse was on the passenger seat, keys gone. No wallet, no struggle, just silence. Birmingham had seen violence before, but this felt different. This was a young mother who'd never missed a shift, never failed to pick up her child. Within 24 hours, the Birmingham Police Department launched one of its largest missing person searches of the decade. Volunteers combed Railroad Park and the vacant lots behind the diner. Helicopters swept the wooded edges of Red Mountain. Detectives knocked on every door within a half-mile radius of Claremont Avenue. Then, on April 6th, 2 joggers cutting through an overgrown lot near 7th Avenue South spotted something pale under a sycamore tree. It was Carolyn. The medical examiner's report would later state she died of blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with a single strike. Her clothing was torn but not removed. Her wristwatch had stopped at 3:08 p.m. Beside her body lay a crushed cigarette butt and a scrap of receipt paper from Benny's Diner. Detective Frank Dillard, lead investigator at the time, ordered the scene sealed by 3:30 p.m. Evidence technicians photographed everything. The cigarette was bagged, labeled Exhibit 7B. It would later become the key that broke the case, but back then, it was just another line item in a logbook thick with dead ends. Lydia Reeves gave her statement that night. She described her sister as cautious, not the type to pick up strangers. Carolyn's boyfriend Ronnie was questioned and released. His alibi was airtight. DNA testing wasn't yet practical, so the physical evidence sat waiting for technology that didn't exist. Funeral services were held the following Friday at Elmwood Cemetery. Over 400 people came, teachers from her high school, former co-workers, families whose kids she'd served pancakes to every weekend. The newspaper headline read, "Lakeview Waitress Remembered for Kindness." After that, the story faded, as they always do, replaced by new headlines, new faces, new grief. But not for Lydia. Not for little Emily, who grew up asking why everyone whispered when her mother's name came up. Every year, on April 4th, Lydia placed fresh azaleas on her sister's grave. Every year, she asked Birmingham police for updates, and every year, the answer was the same. No new leads, no suspects, no closure. That was the world the cold case unit stepped into. Decades later, a world still carrying Carolyn's absence, even if few people spoke her name anymore. The neighborhood where she'd lived was almost unrecognizable now. New condos stood where her duplex once was. The diner had become a craft beer bar with exposed brick and Edison bulbs. Yet the people who'd been around long enough still remembered her smile behind that counter. When Detective Marla Vance reopened the Reeves file in 2019, she started by walking the same route Carolyn would have taken that last afternoon. From Benny's to her car, to the corner where the Corolla was found, and finally to the empty lot on 7th Avenue South. The walk took 10 minutes. 10 minutes that had once held a lifetime. Vance kept a notebook tucked under her arm, jotting impressions as she moved. The angles, the traffic flow, the sight lines. She wasn't looking for nostalgia. She was looking for opportunity, the kind of opportunity a killer might have seen in 1987. She noted that even today, there were blind spots along the alley. Spots where a truck could idle without notice, just like the one witness James Holt reported seeing 38 years earlier, a dark pickup with mismatched tires. The kind of detail no one could prove, but no one forgot either. Back at headquarters, Vance spread the original case photos across a steel table. Color prints fading at the edges. Carolyn's watch, the diner receipt, the cigarette butt. She wrote 3 words on the whiteboard. Who smoked it? That question would become the axis of the investigation. For months, she and forensic analyst Dr. Evan Price ran internal DNA tests on everything recovered from the lot, but the cigarette's trace material was too degraded for the department's aging equipment. Funding was thin, priorities elsewhere. Then, in late 2023, the Alabama Cold Case Initiative received a federal grant to reprocess legacy evidence with modern genetic genealogy. That grant paid for the test that changed everything. The cigarette that once seemed meaningless became Exhibit 1. The saliva on its filter became the voice of a man who thought he'd silenced his victim forever. When the match came back to Dale Merritt, it felt like a name pulled from the static of a radio finally tuning in. A man who'd driven freight through Birmingham in the 80 seconds, often stopping for coffee at Benny's Diner, Carolyn's workplace. A man whose roots coincided with the Lakeview corridor. A man who, according to payroll logs, had been in the city on April 4th, 1987. The detectives would later say it was eerie how neatly the pieces fit. As if the case had been waiting, dormant, for technology to catch up. As if the past refused to stay buried. But in 1987, none of that existed yet. There was only a small community in shock, a sister holding a child who would never remember her mother, and a city that quietly moved on. Still, for those who lived through it, the mention of Carolyn's name could still change the temperature of a room. People lowered their voices, looked at the floor. Because in Birmingham, everyone remembered someone who disappeared. And Carolyn Reeves was the one who never came home. Saturday, April 4th, 1987. The sky over Birmingham started soft gray, the kind of light that makes the streets look washed clean. For Carolyn Reeves, it began like any other workday. She left her duplex on Claremont Avenue a little before 7. Her sister Lydia watched from the porch, coffee in hand, while Carolyn wrestled her daughter's car seat into the back of the blue Corolla. She was humming a tune from the radio, something upbeat, and kissed Emily on the forehead before pulling away. At Benny's Diner, the breakfast rush hit early. The regulars were already in their booths, factory workers still in coveralls, nurses off the night shift, the same 2 students who shared a paper each weekend. Carolyn moved between them with practiced rhythm, refill, smile, plate down, check dropped. The cook, Harold Dixon, would later tell detectives she seemed distracted only once, when a man at the counter asked her something he couldn't hear over the kitchen noise. She frowned, nodded, and went back to work. By 2:30 that afternoon, the lunch crowd had thinned. Carolyn hung up her apron, told Harold she was headed home to change, maybe run errands before meeting her boyfriend Ronnie for dinner. Harold remembered she had counted her tips carefully, folded the bills into her purse, and joked about needing gas money. She walked out into the sunlight, her braids swinging behind her. No one followed, at least, no one they could prove. Witnesses later placed her car at the corner marked gas station on 4th Avenue, around 3:05. She bought $5 worth of gas and a soft drink. The clerk remembered her smile, said she had paid in cash, exact change. At 3:10, a woman jogging along 7th Avenue South saw a light blue Corolla pull over near the curb, the driver's door open. She thought maybe the driver was lost. That was the last confirmed sighting. When Carolyn didn't arrive home by 6, Lydia called Benny's. No one had seen her. By 8, Ronnie called from his apartment, worried. At 9:17, Officer Frank Dillard found the Corolla parked half a mile from her home, the driver's seat pushed back, purse still inside. The keys were missing, but her wallet, ID, and pay envelope lay untouched. Investigators moved fast that night. Dillard canvassed the block. No one had heard a struggle. The nearest resident, an elderly man named Walter Gaines, recalled seeing a truck idling by the curb, earlier a dark pickup, engine running, lights off. He couldn't say what color, only that it was older, maybe a Ford. Detectives processed the car under street lamp light, dust for prints, photograph every angle, bag everything. They found one cigarette butt near the front bumper, flattened under a tire. It went into an evidence envelope labeled Item 7B. At the time, it seemed routine. By dawn, the case was a missing person investigation with no direction. Carolyn's apartment was neat, untouched. The bed made. The babysitter's bag still by the door. On television that evening, Birmingham's Channel 6 anchor led with a 30-second segment. A 26-year-old waitress failed to return home Saturday evening. Police asked anyone with information to contact the department's tip line. That was all. No drama, just another disappearance in a growing city. But in the neighborhoods around Lakeview, people double-checked their locks. Parents kept kids closer on walks. There was a sense hard to name that something ordinary had cracked. 2 days later, when joggers found a body in the overgrown lot on 7th Avenue, the city's quiet turned to fear. The discovery site was cordoned off by 3 in the afternoon. Detective Dillard, still on duty from the missing person call, was first on scene. The medical team took photographs, marked footprints, and collected trace fibers from the ground. That's when they saw it. The same brand of cigarette butt that had been bagged near her car. Same filter pattern, same brand, both crushed under pressure. It didn't mean much then. No database to match it to anyone, no DNA system ready to speak for it. But Dillard wrote it in his notes anyway, 2 cigarettes, same brand, one at the car, one at the scene. That night, he told a local reporter, somewhere between that diner and this lot, someone saw her. No one ever came forward. In the weeks that followed, tips came and went. A man seen at a payphone, a pickup matching a vague description, a rumor about a jealous boyfriend. Investigators followed them all, each turning to dust. By summer, the case file was 2 inches thick, full of handwritten reports and Polaroids clipped with paper bands. And then the file went cold. For 38 years, it sat in the evidence vault, numbered and forgotten until the cold case unit reopened it, and that cigarette spoke again. Detective Marla Vance keeps a copy of Dillard's first report in her desk drawer. She's read it 100 times. The last line still makes her stop every time. Subject's day began as routine. No known disputes, no reason to vanish. Because that's the truth that makes cases like this unbearable. Carolyn's last normal day was just that normal. Coffee, work, gas stop, vanished. The kind of day any one of us could have. The call came in at 9:17 p.m. Officer Frank Dillard was 2 blocks away when dispatch crackled through the radio. Abandoned vehicle, Claremont, and 7th. Possible connection to a missing person. He pulled up beside a light blue Toyota Corolla parked awkwardly near the curb. The driver's door hung slightly open. The engine was cold. Streetlights flickered overhead, casting a weak amber glow across the pavement. Inside the car, everything looked too normal. A purse sat on the passenger seat, its flap open just enough to show a wallet, lipstick, a rolled-up pay envelope. The air smelled faintly of coffee and cigarette smoke. No blood, no broken glass. Just absence. Dillard stood there for a long moment, listening. Birmingham was quiet that night, humid and close. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once, then stopped. He called it in. Within 20 minutes, 2 more units arrived. Detective Marla Vance, then a rookie in training, rode along with her field supervisor. She would remember this scene for the rest of her career, the stillness, the way the radio chatter seemed to echo off the brick buildings. They began with procedure. Photographs first. Gloves on. Evidence bags ready. Dillard's flashlight swept across the pavement. That's when he noticed it. A single cigarette butt flattened near the front tire. It gleamed faintly under the light, the white paper stained dark. He bent, tweezers steady, and dropped it into a small plastic envelope. Label, Item 7B. He didn't know it then, but that one move, small, careful, automatic, would solve the case nearly 40 years later. The rest of the car told a story without words. The driver's seat was pushed back farther than Carolyn would have said it. She was short. The floor mats were clean. Her purse was still zipped, tip money intact. Nothing suggested robbery. Nothing suggested panic. By 10:05, they had a perimeter set. The neighborhood drew quiet spectators to porches, whispering over railings. Someone mentioned seeing a pickup idling nearby earlier that day, a dark truck with a dented tailgate. No one had caught the plate. Vance logged the witness name, but even she knew how fragile memory can be once adrenaline fades. At 10:27, Lieutenant Carl Johnson arrived to oversee the scene. He was methodical, experienced, and already making mental checklists. Trace evidence, prints, tire casts. The rain clouds building over the ridge worried him. They had to move fast before the weather wiped the story clean. Technicians dusted the door handle and steering wheel for prints. Dozens appeared, some smudged, some partial. The hope was that one would stand out. But the 1,980 seconds database could only compare local arrest cards. Most prints went unmatched for decades. Vance circled the car again, looking outward this time. She spotted a faint footprint in the clay just off the curb. Men's size 11. Heavy tread. A trucker's work boot, maybe. She photographed it, took a mold, and wrote a note. Left track deeper than right, possible limp or shift in weight. Every piece felt important that night. Every detail a potential key. At 11:40, the tow truck arrived to move the vehicle to the police garage for full processing. Dillard leaned against his cruiser, exhaustion and unease tightening behind his eyes. He'd seen runaways, car thefts, arguments gone wrong, but this was different. There was a quietness to it, an unfinished quality that made the hair on his arms stand up. He looked at Vance. "Doesn't feel like she left on her own," he said. She didn't answer. By dawn, the Reeves case had a file number and a team. The search grid stretched across the Lakeview District alleys, drainage ditches, wooded lots. Officers carried clipboards and flashlights, walking shoulder to shoulder. Civilians joined in, some still in work clothes from the night shift, some clutching coffee cups. Local radio stations repeated the same message every hour. A 26-year-old woman last seen leaving Benny's Diner on Saturday afternoon. Blue Toyota recovered. Please report any sightings. The community moved as one body, anxious and sleepless. Reporters followed the searchers through the early light, camera flashes bouncing off the wet grass. A few of them knew Carolyn personally. Birmingham was still that small then. Detective Vance rode in the passenger seat of the command van, mapping calls as they came in. A woman thought she saw a blue car on I-20. A man swore he heard a scream near the rail yards. Another caller claimed a stranger had been watching women at the laundromat. Every tip was logged. None were solid. At noon, rain began to fall. Light at first, then steady, thin sheets that blurred the edges of everything. The volunteers pressed on anyway, moving through knee-high weeds behind a row of empty houses near 7th Avenue South. At 2:43 p.m., a shout came from the far end of the lot. 2 joggers had stumbled across something under a tangle of kudzu near a sycamore tree. The search halted. Officers converged. Yellow tape went up. Cameras clicked. The radio call to headquarters was short and flat. Possible body located. Female. Stand by for confirmation. Back at the command center, Dillard closed his notebook slowly. They'd found her. For him, the first hours were ending, but the real investigation was just beginning. Evidence technicians from the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences were already en route. The rain kept falling, washing the footprints away, erasing the scene one drop at a time. Vance would later write in her own report, "The first night we thought we were chasing a missing person. By the second, we knew we were chasing a killer." By Sunday morning, the town was no longer quiet. What had started as a missing person alert turned into a full-scale homicide investigation, and word spread faster than the rain could wash it away. The police radio channels buzzed with overlapping calls, new search sectors, new volunteers, new rumors. Every cafe in Birmingham seemed to be talking about the same thing: the waitress from Lakeview, found in the weeds by 7th Avenue. Detective Marla Vance drove past the flashing barricades just after dawn. She had not slept. The lot where Carolyn Reeves had been discovered was sealed now, a canopy tent pitched above the spot to shield it from weather and curious eyes. Technicians in white Tyvek suits moved like ghosts through the drizzle, marking evidence flags in the wet grass. Vance parked on the edge of the street, opened her notebook, and began recording times. 6:42, evidence team arrives. 6:49, press van from Channel 6 pulls up, security moves them back. 7:10, local volunteers form at command post behind Street Marks Church. The searchers wore yellow vests, each with a laminated map taped to the front. The maps were dotted with grid lines, the kind drawn with a ruler across photocopied street plans. It was an organized chaos, people wanting to help but unsure where to look first. Lieutenant Carl Johnson addressed the crowd through a portable loudspeaker. "Stay in pairs. Do not touch or move anything that looks out of place. Call out if you find personal items, clothing, jewelry, bags, anything." They nodded, anxious to do something. At a makeshift table, members of the church poured coffee into paper cups. A stack of flyers printed overnight sat in the center, Carolyn's photograph above the words, "Do you know anything?" The image showed her laughing behind the diner counter, unaware that it would one day be turned into a poster of grief. Search lines moved out from the church in 4 directions. Some volunteers combed the wooded belt along the railway. Others worked through vacant lots near the interstate. By noon, the sound of calling voices echoed through the neighborhoods. "Carolyn! Carolyn Reeves!" Even though they knew she was gone, they kept calling anyway. Inside the command tent, Vance studied the first wave of forensic reports. The timeline was tightening. Estimated time of death, between 3 and 4 in the afternoon, Saturday. No signs of robbery or sexual assault. Partial boot impression in mud size 11, heavy work tread. Trace fibers, gray cotton, possible uniform shirt. The cigarette butt recovered beside the body was logged as Item 7C, collected and sealed for transport. She ordered it shipped to Montgomery for chemical analysis, unaware that it would become the turning point decades later. At 12:30, Detective Frank Dillard arrived with the coroner's preliminary findings. His face was pale. The rain had flattened his hair against his forehead. "Single strike to the head," he said quietly. "Clean. Fast. She never saw it coming." Vance wrote it down but didn't speak. In homicide work, silence was often the only respectful response. By mid-afternoon, reporters flooded the area. Satellite dishes sprouted along the curb. One anchor in a bright raincoat delivered her live feed just beyond the police tape. Residents in this normally peaceful Birmingham neighborhood woke this morning to the news that the body of 26-year-old waitress Carolyn Reeves has been found less than half a mile from her home. Behind her, officers worked with methodical calm. The contrast between the chaos of the media and the discipline of the scene gave the moment an eerie weight. Neighbors peeked from porches, children pressed against windows. The entire block had turned into a stage lit by emergency lights and camera flashes. That evening, the mayor issued a brief statement urging patience, promising resources, and asking residents to stay vigilant. But reassurance did little to slow the churn of rumor. Some swore they'd seen a strange man near the diner that week. Others insisted it was a jealous boyfriend or a drifter off the interstate. Within hours, names were flying through the gossip chain faster than police could vet them. The department opened a dedicated tip line. By nightfall, more than 200 calls had come in, most contradictory, some bizarre. A woman claimed she dreamed of the killer's face. A man reported a pickup truck following him home 2 nights earlier. Another caller whispered that the police already knew who did it and were hiding the truth. Every rumor had to be logged, traced, and filed. It was like trying to catch fog in a net. At 10 p.m., Vance and Dillard returned to the station, drenched and running on caffeine. The evidence board already filled the wall maps, Polaroids, string lines linking locations. Vance pinned a new card above the center photo of the car. 3 hours unaccounted for. That was the gap between the time Carolyn left the diner and the moment her watch stopped at 3:08. Somewhere inside that window, her path had crossed with a killer. If we can fill the gap, Dillard said, we find him. But the hours stretched into days, and the gap refused to close. The next morning, church bells rang across Lakeview. Parishioners filed in, heads bowed. Pastor Earl Simmons devoted the service to Carolyn, calling her a daughter of this town, one of our own. Outside, news vans idled beside the curb, antennas tilted toward the gray sky. Afterward, the congregation walked to the search tent, carrying casseroles and blankets, a southern ritual of comfort. Grief and hospitality intertwined in the way only small towns understand. The volunteers didn't stop. They searched the drainage culverts, the empty warehouses, the riverbanks where the city met the woods. Each night they returned, mud-covered and quiet, eyes haunted by what they hadn't found. And for all their effort, the case seemed to grow colder by the hour. By Wednesday, there were no new leads. The witness descriptions contradicted each other. The boot print cast yielded no local matches. The lab could not extract a clear profile from the cigarette using the technology of the time. The investigation stalled hard. But the town didn't. The people of Birmingham carried Carolyn's story into every corner store, every church bulletin, every whispered conversation. Her photograph stayed taped to grocery windows long after the rain had curled the edges. Detective Vance would later say those first days taught her what a community's heartbeat sounded like when it was afraid: steady, fragile, and impossibly loud. The first week of the investigation produced more names than facts. By Thursday morning, Detective Marla Vance's evidence board looked like a map of confusion. Dozens of index cards pinned in uneven rows, red string connecting suspects who had never met. At the top, unknown male, size 11 boots. Every rumor had earned its place. Everyone had to be disproved. One tip came from a waitress at another diner downtown. She remembered a man who had sat at the counter that same Saturday, smoking the same brand found at the crime scene. His name, she thought, was Ray, maybe Roy. He paid in cash and wore a patch-covered denim jacket. Investigators combed through old payroll slips, delivery routes, and bar tabs. No Ray. No Roy. Another lead pointed toward the victim's boyfriend, Ronnie Greer. His alibi, working a double shift driving a city bus, was easy to check. The logs confirmed his route from 3 p.m. to midnight, passengers boarding and signing tickets. Yet whispers still followed him through the city. People want closure, and when they can't find it, they build it. Vance hated that part most, the way fear turned speculation into certainty. A third rumor came from the rail yard foreman, who claimed he'd seen a dark pickup parked near the tracks that afternoon. He swore it belonged to a drifter who sometimes slept under the overpass. Police canvassed the area for days, talking to anyone who looked transient. Nothing. The drifter was gone, if he had ever been there. At the department's daily briefing, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and exhaustion. Lieutenant Carl Johnson drew a simple timeline on the board. She leaves work at 2:30. Her car is seen at 3:05. The watch stops at 3:08. Body found 40 hours later. That's all we have that's solid. He underlined the time in red. 3 minutes. That tiny window became an obsession. 3 minutes when a life ended, and no one saw it happen. As the days turned to weeks, the investigation became background noise in Birmingham. The newspapers ran out of headlines. The television stations shifted back to city council meetings and weather alerts. The phone in Vance's office still rang, but mostly with dead ends, anonymous voices, bar stories, psychic visions. Some nights she stayed late, reading through the file by lamplight. The crime scene photos had faded at the edges, but one detail always caught her eye: the cigarette butt beside the body. Whoever had smoked it hadn't crushed it with their shoe. It had been dropped and left, still round, the filter faintly indented with teeth marks. That meant calm. Not panic. Not rush. Whoever did this thought he had time. She bagged a second copy of the photograph and taped it inside her notebook as a reminder. Somewhere in that cigarette, she told herself, is the name we can't say yet. Outside the precinct, the community's patience thinned. Flyers began disappearing from storefronts. Church vigils grew smaller. People wanted to move on, even if guilt made them whisper her name like a secret. Lydia Reeves, the victim's sister, refused to fade into the background. She called the police station every Monday morning. Always the same question. Any news? Always the same answer. Not yet. One afternoon she arrived in person, carrying a folder thick with notes. She had started keeping track of her own leads. Neighbors who remembered odd cars. Co-workers who noticed new regulars at the diner. Rumors passed in half-truths. Most were unusable, but her determination impressed Vance. The detective invited her to sit down. They spent 2 hours comparing timelines, talking through theories. When Lydia left, Vance's notebook had 2 new names, both locals with minor criminal records. She ran them both. Nothing matched. Still, it reminded her why she couldn't quit. Someone out there had stolen decades from a family that deserved peace. By summer, the case was officially inactive. That was the polite term for cold. Files boxed, evidence sealed, manpower reassigned. Vance hated the paperwork that came with that word. It felt like failure on government letterhead. She stored her notes in a separate binder labeled personal copy. It wasn't regulation, but every detective did it. She couldn't bring herself to let the case disappear into storage. Her last entry that year read, "If we ever solve this, it'll be by accident or science." She didn't know that both would happen, just not soon. Across town, rumors continued to live quiet lives of their own. Bar stories became legends. The man in the pickup turned into a ghost tale, told by parents who wanted their kids home before dark. The old diner changed owners twice, the name repainted on the window each time, but the locals still called it Benny's. And every so often, when the lights flickered at closing time, someone would say, "That's her," reminding us she's still waiting. 30 years later, when new DNA funding revived the cold case unit, one of the first things Detective Marla Vance did was pull her old binder from the shelf. She flipped to the page marked with that photograph, the cigarette beside the body, and smiled grimly. "All right, old friend," she said. "Let's see what you've been keeping secret." The box that held the Reeves file moved 4 times in 30 years. First, it sat on a metal shelf in the Birmingham Police Evidence Room, Row 12, Section C, a place detectives jokingly called Purgatory. Then it was transferred to a warehouse on the city's north side when the department modernized in the late 90s. Later, it went to a temporary climate-controlled vault run by the state. Each move meant new barcodes, new inventory logs, and another layer of dust. Inside the box, the air itself seemed to hold the past. Polaroids curled at the corners. Typed reports had yellowed. The sealed bag labeled Item 7B, the cigarette butt, sat at the bottom, forgotten but perfectly preserved. By the early 2000s, most of the original team had retired. Detective Frank Dillard had taken a position teaching forensics at the academy. Lieutenant Carl Johnson passed away in 2008. The only person who still asked about the case was Lydia Reeves, calling every spring on the anniversary. "Any chance something new's come up?" she'd ask. "Not yet," the duty sergeant would reply. "Then I'll call next year." She always did. The neighborhood changed. The old diner became a boutique cafe. The vacant lot where the body had been found turned into a parking lot for condos. The city paved over the soil that once held a secret, but the memory lingered with the few who remembered. A local news outlet ran a small feature in 2012, Unsolved in Birmingham, the waitress who never came home. It ran on a Friday night, sandwiched between weather updates and high school football scores. For 2 days, the police tip line lit up again. One caller claimed her ex-husband had bragged about knowing what happened. Another said she remembered seeing a strange truck decades earlier. Each lead fizzled. But the story stirred something inside Marla Vance. She had been promoted by then, running administrative audits for the cold case unit. When she saw Carolyn Reeves's photograph flash on screen smiling behind the diner counter, she felt that same quiet unease from the night of the discovery. She pulled the case file from storage. The clerk signed it out reluctantly, explaining that budget cuts had frozen most re-examinations. Vance signed anyway. She spent her own weekend reading through every page, every photograph. The evidence still spoke. It just needed a better listener. She began pushing for funding small grants at first, then federal applications. For years, she heard the same answer. The technology's too expensive. Then, in 2023, something changed. The Alabama Cold Case Initiative received a state grant to reprocess unsolved cases using forensic genealogy, a new science that built family trees from DNA fragments, once thought useless. It was the same method that had solved high-profile murders across the country. Vance made sure the Reeves case was at the top of the list. "If it's going to work," she told her captain, "this one deserves to be first." In November 2023, technicians opened the evidence box for the first time in over 3 decades. They photographed each item: the car key fob, the diner receipt, the cigarette butt sealed in plastic. Then they carefully extracted a portion of material from the filter using microforceps. The lab director warned her not to expect miracles. The DNA could be too degraded. Weeks passed with no word. Then, one Thursday morning in January, her phone rang. "Marla, you're not going to believe this," the analyst said. "We got a partial profile." The sequence was too incomplete for CODIS, the federal criminal database, but it was enough for a genealogical search. The profile was uploaded to a public ancestry site under a law enforcement flag. Within days, matches appeared. Distant cousins in northern Alabama, people who had sent their DNA in for family history reports. The forensic genealogist assigned to the case, Dr. Rebecca Fontaine, built a family tree that stretched back to the 1800s. She mapped out marriages, migrations, and descendants. It was painstaking work, connecting records one birth certificate at a time. By mid-February, she had narrowed it down to a single branch, 3 living men who shared the right genetic markers. One of them was Dale Merritt, a retired truck driver living quietly on 21st Street South. When Vance read the report, she felt that same chill she'd known decades earlier under the streetlights by the abandoned car. She cross-checked the name through old employment records. Merritt had driven freight through Birmingham in the 80s. His roots matched the timeline. His age fit the witness descriptions. Everything lined up too neatly to ignore. She wrote one line in her notebook. "DNA doesn't lie, people do." She applied for a warrant to collect a direct DNA sample. It was approved on the 10th of February 2025. 2 officers followed Merritt from his duplex to a gas station, where he discarded a used coffee cup. That cup went straight to the lab. Within 48 hours, the results came back, a full genetic match to the profile from item 7B. The file that had traveled through 4 evidence rooms, 4 decades, and 4 generations of detectives was suddenly alive again. The official arrest would happen 11 days later, just after sunrise, but the emotional arrest, the moment history caught up, happened the second Marla read the confirmation email. She sat at her desk, staring at the printout until the words blurred. Then she whispered half to herself, "We got him, Carolyn. We finally got him." For the families, time had moved differently. Lydia Reeves had grown gray-haired, her niece Emily, now a teacher herself, living 2 states away. When the call came from the cold case unit, Lydia cried quietly for a long time before she could speak. She didn't ask for the suspect's name right away. She only asked one question. "Did he ever leave Birmingham?" Vance said no. He'd been there all along. That answer broke something and mended something at the same time. By the end of February, news leaked to the press. Headlines read, "38-year mystery, nears breakthrough." Reporters parked outside the precinct. Producers called every retired detective they could find for comment. For the first time in decades, the name Carolyn Reeves returned to the public voice, not as a footnote, but as the reason technology and persistence mattered. Vance stayed late that night, reviewing the warrant paperwork one last time. Rain hit the windows like static. The city outside hummed with traffic, unaware that it was living through the final quiet hours before justice knocked on an old man's door. The box opened with a soft crack. White gloves, stainless table, a camera on a tripod clicking once every time a seal was cut. Inside the box, the past waited, labeled, and quiet. Item 7B. The cigarette butt. Detective Marla Vance stood with the lab director and watched. She did not touch anything. She only nodded when each step was read aloud for the record. Evidence bag 7B, seal intact, chain of custody verified, opening now. They laid the filter on clean glass under a hood. The room smelled like ethanol and cotton. A clock ticked on the wall, steady and indifferent. The analyst, Dr. Evan Price, spoke in short sentences for the camera. Goal is low-copy single nucleotide profile. We will use miniature STRs for context. We will employ single-tube extraction to minimize loss. Negative controls will run in parallel. He cut the paper casing with a scalpel. He teased out the dampened fibers. He scraped what he could from the inner paper with micro-forceps and transferred it to a tube no bigger than a thumbnail. 38 years since a hand flicked that cigarette to the ground. 38 years to this moment. They ran the extraction twice. First pass for the main profile, second pass as insurance. The machine hummed. The screen filled with points of color no one outside this room could read. Vance looked at the glass window that separated the lab from the hallway. Rain streaked down the pane. She remembered the night the car was found, the open door, the purse on the seat, the quiet. A technician printed a page and handed it to Dr. Price. His eyes flicked left to right. He did not smile. He did not frown. He marked 3 places on the sheet with a pen. Partial SNP profile, he said. Usable. Not CODIS grade, but it will support genealogical inference. They built the digital file. They checked it against internal contamination logs from that day. The negative controls were clean. The reagent blank was clean. The lab tech signed the page in blue ink. Vance exhaled for the first time in minutes. Next step was permission. The profile would go to a public genealogy system where people searched for family history. The request moved through legal with 2 lines of reasoning. The case was a violent homicide, and all other methods had failed. The assistant district attorney signed the order with a short note. Approved. Public upload permitted. Investigative use only. They did not expect fireworks. Genealogy is patient. It grows slowly like a tree from a seed. The upload posted on a Wednesday morning. The first match appeared by Friday noon. A 3rd cousin in Lauderdale County. Then a 4th cousin in Marshall County. Then a cluster tied to a couple who married in 1899. That was Dr. Rebecca Fontaine's domain. She kept a legal pad, a dull pencil, and a stack of digital records. She drew lines between names. She wrote dates. She circled clusters when cousins overlapped and scratched them out when they split. She built the tree backward first. Great-grandparents. Great-great-grandparents. A son who moved to Cullman. A daughter who moved to Birmingham. Census entries from 1930 lived again as lines on a pad. Then she turned the tree forward. She traced births to living men. She marked ages. She marked locations. She marked opportunities. 3 branches fit. Each ended with a man in his 60s. Each had lived within an hour of Birmingham in 1987. Only one had work records that put him inside the city that month. Dale Merritt. Fontaine wrote the name slowly. She said it aloud once to hear how it felt. Merritt, she said. Like Merritt without the T. She flagged the report to the cold case unit. She attached the pedigree map. She added one caveat in plain language. Genealogy points to family. It does not prove the individual. You must confirm with a direct sample. Vance printed the report and stared at the paper. The name stared back. It matched old rumor. It matched route maps. It matched the quiet shape of the crime. The unit met in the small briefing room at the end of the hall. The walls were pinholed from years of pushpins and string. Lieutenant Carl Johnson sat at the head of the table. Dr. Price slid his report across. Dr. Fontaine, joined by speakerphone. Her voice buzzed slightly through the ceiling tiles. We have a likely line, she said. The statistics are strong, but you need his DNA. Vance nodded. They needed a warrant, or a discard. They chose both paths. The Jefferson County judge preferred clean paperwork. He wanted clear language. He wanted chain of custody to read like a straight road. Vance wrote the affidavit with care. She described where item 7B had been collected. She described how it had been stored. She described the lab steps with simple verbs. Recovered, sealed, preserved, extracted. She added one sentence that anticipated the benign contact argument. The cigarette was photographed and collected within 2 feet of the victim's body inside a sealed homicide scene. No members of the public had access to that space. Innocent transfer is not consistent with the scene. The warrant took 2 days. In the meantime, surveillance began. 2 plain sedans rotated positions on 21st Street South. The men wore light jackets and nondescript faces. They watched Merritt's door. They watched his routine. 7 a.m. He left with a thermos of coffee. 7:10. He bought a paper at the corner store. 7:15. He sat by the front window of the cafe near 5 Points South with a small plate and a black coffee. 9 o'clock. He walked home slow, as if the day could not catch him if he did not hurry. On the 3rd day, he tossed a paper cup into a sidewalk bin on the way back. The tail car rolled by and parked 3 spaces ahead. An investigator stepped out, tied his shoe, and palmed the cup into an evidence bag as he stood. The bag sealed with a click. Back at the lab, Dr. Price labeled it with a temporary number. He cut the rim of the lid and swabbed the inner edge. He ran the test in parallel with a second swab from the cup wall. The machine hummed. The screen filled with color again. The results populated as blocks. The system compared them to the item 7B SNP profile first, then to a derived STR set built to confirm identity. The match statistic ticked upward as the software calculated. The room was quiet. Only the clock and the fans spoke. 1 in 2 billion. That was the final probability of a random match at the measured loci. Price printed the page and signed his name at the bottom. He handed it to Vance without ceremony. "There it is," he said. Vance read the number twice. She looked up. "Put it into words," she said. "The DNA from the cup matches the DNA from the cigarette butt collected at the homicide scene. The probability of it being anyone else is less than 1 in 2 billion. He added a line without prompting. "We also ran the cup against internal staff DNA. No matches. Negative controls clean." She did not realize she was holding her breath until she had to breathe. The call to the district attorney came next. James Holloway spoke in short phrases. "This is what we needed. Get me your packet. We go for the warrant before end of day." Vance wrote the arrest plan on the whiteboard as the room filled with people. 2 entry officers. 1 cover. 1 EMT staged 2 blocks away. 1 negotiator on standby in case something broke sideways. The operations sergeant read the plan back in his slow, gravel voice. "We knock at sunrise. We want him calm. He is older. He is alone. We control the stairwell. We do not fan out." They printed neighborhood maps. They printed a photograph of the duplex and marked angles of view with thin arrows. They walked through the door sequence in the hallway outside the room. Knock, announce, pause, knock again, breach only if necessary. The secondary warrants stacked on the desk as the afternoon slid toward dusk. Search warrant for the residence. Search warrant for the vehicle. Digital warrant for any devices found. The language was neat. The dates were precise. The judge initialed each page with a tiny square signature like a stamp. Vance went home for a shower and came back in the same hour. She sat with the file alone before the team arrived to kit up. The room felt like a church in the quiet. She opened her notebook. She read her first lines from years ago. "The car is too clean. The scene is too calm." She closed the notebook. She placed it on top of the file. She touched the spine like an old friend. At 4 in the morning, the unit gathered in the motor bay. Coffee steamed in paper cups. Velcro rasped. Radios clicked. Names were called and answered. "Price? Here. Johnson? Here. Vance? Here." The operations sergeant held a short talk. No bravado, no speeches, just what to do and what not to do. He ended with a line that belonged in every briefing. "We are going to knock on a door and change history. We will do it without anyone getting hurt." They rolled at 5. The city was night black and wet. Streetlights glowed in pools. The hospital windows to the east made a wall of soft squares like stars behind glass. The tires hissed on pavement as the convoy turned toward 21st Street South. In the lead car, Vance watched her breath, fog the windshield, and fade. She flexed her hands once. She felt the years in her fingers. They parked without drama. They stepped out without haste. They moved like people who had practiced 1,000 times and knew that practice was why the world stays intact. At the corner, a neighbor's lamp clicked on. The rest of the street kept sleeping. The stack formed at the base of the stairs to the duplex. The radio made a soft sound in her ear. The time rolled over at 7:11. The sergeant looked at her and nodded. She raised her hand to knock. The years behind her gathered like a tide. The cigarette in a bag. The paper cup in a bin. The tree drawn in pencil. The numbers on a page that said 2 billion to 1. If you listen closely, you can hear the thin hinge the past swings on. It sounds like a knuckle on wood. "Police," she said. "We need to speak with you." The door handle twitched. A chain slid. The hallway smelled like old coffee and dust. One more second, and the story would break from the future into the present. If you like cases where one overlooked clue flips a whole town, you are in the right place. But to feel why this knock mattered, you have to see how the pieces snap together after the door opens. 7:12 a.m. The chain slid free. The door opened 6 inches. Detective Marla Vance saw a man in a faded robe, coffee still steaming in his hand. "Mr. Merritt?" she asked. He blinked. "Yes, ma'am." The sergeant stepped forward. "Police department, we have a warrant for your arrest." There was no chase, no raised voice. Merritt looked from one uniform to the next as if they had arrived to deliver mail. He set the cup on the porch rail, turned, and placed his hands behind his back without being told. Click. The sound of cuffs closing was almost gentle. The arrest team moved through the small duplex with slow precision. 2 officers cleared the front room, 2 the kitchen, 1 the narrow bedroom, where a bed was half made. A notepad sat on the table beside an open crossword. A calendar hung on the wall, March already half crossed out. Vance stood in the doorway while the evidence team photographed every surface. On the counter was a jar of instant coffee, a pack of cigarettes, and a single lighter. No confrontation, no denial. Just resignation, thick in the air. At headquarters, the booking officer read from the form. Dale Merritt, 63 years old. 1 count of murder under Alabama Code 13, a -6-2. Bond hearing to be scheduled. Fingerprint scanner, mugshot camera, paperwork stack. When the flash went off, Merritt didn't blink. He simply stared through the lens like a man watching his own photograph take him apart. Vance observed from behind the glass. She'd spent years imagining this moment. She thought it might feel triumphant. It didn't. It felt heavy, necessary, final. The lab technicians transferred the new DNA confirmation packet to the district attorney's office. James Holloway met them in the hallway, briefcase already open. "We have chain of custody from start to finish?" "Yes, sir." "Then let's get the indictment." He signed the application with a quick stroke of his pen. By noon, every newsroom in Birmingham had the headline cued. "Arrest in 1987 Reeves murder. Retired trucker charged." Reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Cameras, microphones, umbrellas. Lieutenant Carl Johnson faced the line of questions with measured calm. "This case was solved through persistence and forensic genealogy," he said. "One piece of evidence, preserved properly, allowed modern science to do what wasn't possible in 1987. He thanked the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences and the Cold Case Initiative. When asked about motive, he declined to speculate. When asked if more arrests were possible, he said, "We don't anticipate any." Inside the precinct, officers watched the live feed on a small television perched on top of a filing cabinet. Someone clapped once. No one joined in. They just nodded quietly to one another. That afternoon, word spread through the city faster than rain on asphalt. Neighbors who'd known Merritt for decades gathered on the sidewalks of 21st Street South, looking up at the window of his now sealed duplex. Some swore he had always seemed kind. Others admitted they had never spoken to him at all. At the 5 Points Cafe, where he drank coffee every morning, the waitress sat at the counter, staring at the empty stool. "He was polite," she told a reporter, "tipped in cash. Read the sports section. I can't believe it." Down in Lakeview, people drove past the old diner where Carolyn Reeves once worked, now remodeled into a cafe with Edison bulbs and brick walls. Someone left flowers on the doorstep. No note, just lilies wrapped in newspaper. When the detectives returned to their offices, The adrenaline had already drained away. The evidence board that had dominated the wall for years was now ringed with small gold stickers, each one marking a confirmed fact. Vance stood in front of it. She reached up and placed one final sticker beside the photograph of the cigarette butt. Then she drew a line through the question, "Who smoked it?" "We know," she said softly. That evening, the Jefferson County Jail processed Merritt into a holding cell. He asked for water, he asked for an inhaler, then he asked one question of the deputy at the door. "Did they find her family?" The deputy nodded. "They know," he said. Merritt closed his eyes and leaned back against the wall. The camera in the corner kept its silent watch. Outside, thunder rolled across the ridge. Reporters filed their evening stories. Anchors spoke of closure, of justice delayed but not denied. But in Birmingham, the word closure always sounded temporary. The next morning, Vance returned to her desk early. She opened the Reeves case file, now officially labeled Solved. Inside the front cover, she slipped a note written on plain paper. "Never forget the patience of evidence." She closed the file, turned off the lamp, and left for court. The courtroom smelled of varnish and old paper. Every seat was filled with reporters, retired officers, faces from a generation that still remembered the headlines from 1987. Dale Merritt sat at the defense table in a gray suit that hung loose on his shoulders. His lawyer spoke softly, the way people talk to someone already lost. Across the aisle sat Lydia Reeves, hands clasped around a folded photograph of her sister. When the clerk read the indictment aloud, the sound seemed to echo longer than it should have. Count 1. Murder in the first degree. Merritt didn't raise his head. He only whispered, "Guilty." No outburst, no drama. Just the quiet rustle of people realizing the wait was finally over. Detective Marla Vance watched from the second row. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry. She didn't, but when the judge thanked the cold case unit for the work of time and truth, her throat tightened. Outside, the courthouse steps were slick with rain again, same as the night Carolyn's car was found. Reporters spoke into cameras, their voices bouncing between umbrellas. After 38 years, Birmingham has its answer. That evening, the precinct lights burned late. Vance boxed the evidence herself, 7B, 7C, every photograph, every map. She sealed it all, one final time. The file's label changed from active to resolved. Before she shut the lid, she slipped in one more note. Justice doesn't expire, only patience does. She signed her initials, closed the box, and carried it to the archive room. The shelves stretched into darkness, lined with hundreds of other stories waiting for their turn. Lydia Reeves stood alone at the edge of Lakeview Park, the same park where her sister used to read under the oak trees. She scattered a handful of lilies into the water. The stems drifted outward, slow and quiet. A reporter had asked her earlier if this meant closure. "No," she'd said. "Closure isn't real. You just learn how to carry the noise." Weeks passed. The city moved on, but not completely. At the diner, now a modern cafe, a customer pointed out something to the new owner. The old brick wall behind the counter, recently sandblasted, still showed faint lettering from decades earlier. Benny's Diner. It had resurfaced beneath the paint, like a memory refusing to stay buried. The owner left it there. Detective Vance retired later that year. She kept one thing from the Reeves case: the original evidence label from item 7B, yellowed and fragile. She framed it above her desk at home. Visitors often asked what it was. She always gave the same answer: a promise kept. But even she knew there was one piece that would never quite fit. The boot print from the mud, size 11, heavy tread, had always been just slightly too small to match Merritt's worn work boots. No secondary profile had ever been found. Maybe it was an old print from a searcher that day. Maybe it wasn't. The file stayed closed, but that question stayed open. Night settles differently over Birmingham, now quieter, steadier. The live oaks on 21st Street throw long shadows over the duplex where a door once opened at sunrise. If you drive by slowly, you'll see the porch light still burns. The new tenants never found the switch that controls it. They decided to leave it on.